there. Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. The program you were about to see, we should advise, was taped several days before you see it, because the schedule of U.S. Representative Tim Griffin, who joins us for the next half hour, and, of course, the schedule of the Congress itself, makes a slightly more timely program pretty awkward. But at any rate, Congressman, thanks for coming in. Thanks for the time.
Appreciate it.
You, by the way, it's just to date it, we're taping on August the 27th. You've got, what, about 10 more days before you go, approximately 10 more days before you go back?
Something like that. Go back early September.
You're going back to a number of deadlines that you have to meet, and, of course, the most immediate is the budget. Spending authority runs out on the September 30th. What are you going to do?
It's going to be interesting to see. I think there are a lot of unknowns right now, like there have been in the past. You have some of the political posturing, of course. I saw the President's Chief of Staff say, I guess it was yesterday, what the President and others have said repeatedly, that they will not negotiate on the debt ceiling. For example, and a lot of these different deadlines will be discussed in relation to each other as part of or in hopes of getting some sort of package or deal. But I can tell you that anytime anybody in Washington says that they won't negotiate over A, B, or C, they are beginning negotiations. We know that there will be lots of conversations, and I think if anybody tells you that they know what the outcome will be like on funding the government, on the debt ceiling, on tax reform, and any of these other issues, I think they're just guessing. But let me just say this. But I have supported almost every single agreement that we have reached since I've been there. The one that I did not was the fiscal cliff, because I couldn't believe that it increased spending at the same time that it was doing everything else. But the Budget Control Act and all these other things that we have, the many times that we have voted on CRs, I've supported all of that stuff, not because they were wonderful pieces of legislation, but because I thought they were preferable to the alternative.
What is preferable to, well, the alternative this time, either on the budget resolution, whether it's a CR, it's going to have to be a CR, a continuing resolution, is it not? I mean, you can't get, 11 spending bills out.
Sure. But let me tell you the alternative would be shutting down the government. I notice that some people, that would be one alternative. I do not support, and have made it abundantly clear, that I do not support shutting down the government. I don't think that we gain fiscally. A lot of people think you're saving money by shutting down the government. You don't save money necessarily by shutting down the government. You definitely inject a lot of uncertainty into the economy.
Costs money, does it not, by some calculations?
By some calculations, I think CBO, Congressional Budget Office, and it actually does cost money, because you have stops and starts, which, as you know, in some contracting and defense contracting and other things, actually costs money. But it's not an effective way to go. My voting record demonstrates that. Now, we're not going to vote on whether to shut down the government or not. Of course, we don't have those votes. We'll have votes on funding the government, and we'll vote to fund the government. I'm confident of that. Now, some have talked about defunding Obamacare. I'm sure you were going to ask that, but let me just say a couple things on that.
Well, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Through a CR. Here is the big secret that a lot of these outside groups that sometimes I agree with, sometimes I disagree with, a lot of them are not telling folks. 94% of Obamacare or Affordable Care Act or the president's health care law, whatever, pick your name, 94% of the funding for that is what in the government under the law is called mandatory or autopilot spending, which means we don't vote to approve it. It's written into the law. So all you're going to be able to impact with regard to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, in the CR at a maximum is about 6% of the funding for Obamacare. Now, I'm not against using the CR to trim and to do whatever with regard to Obamacare. But the idea that you're going to be able to defund the law through a CR is just impossible. It's not, that's just not how it works. The CR only relates to about 6% of Obamacare funding.
There have been innumerable 30, well, you can count them, 36, close to 40, if not 40 votes now on the House floor to defund, as it were. Now, you've joined with the...
Well, not votes. Those aren't votes on the House floor. Those were signatures on a letter, I think. That may be what you're talking about. Look, I signed that letter. I'm all for using the CR to do what we've done with other votes, which is to defund parts of it, defund what we can. What I try to manage with people is expectations and say, look, in a perfect world, if you got everything you wanted in a CR, the universe is 6% of Obamacare funding. Because mandatory funding, which you're well aware of, is not subject to the CR. It's written into the law. Mandatory funding includes Obamacare, Social Security,
entitlements,
Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt. I've been in Congress for 2.5, going on 3 years, and I have never once had to vote one way or the other to fund any of those programs. Why? Because when they were passed, it was written into the law. So what I'm focused on when you talk about using the CR to deal with parts of Obamacare, I have no problem with that, and here's what I'm talking about. We've had about 40 votes relating to repealing Obamacare, defunding it, replacing it, revising it, whatever, okay? Some people say, well, why do you have all those votes? I think we're winning the argument. You know, some of those the president has signed into law. 7. A lot of people don't know this, I have found in my conversations, so I try to say it as much as possible. 7 of those 40 votes that we're criticized for having by some people, 7 of those, the President of the United States has now agreed with us and signed them into law after the Democrat Senate passed them. Whether it's a 1099 provision repeal, whether it's defunding what we call Obamacare slush funds, where it's just money that they can use for this or that. 7 of those, the president has said, I agree with the Republican House, and I will sign this into law.
He said, or the advocates of the health care reform say that you're nibbling at the edges, which is the precise reason he went along with them, with those 6 or 7
Well, let me ask you this. I would say that certainly we have not been able to do what a lot of us would like to do, which is replace it with something else. But let me say this. Is it nibbling at the edges when the President of the United States takes one of the 2 pillars, the employer mandate, the other pillar is the individual mandate, and delays the entire deal for a year? If you would have told me 2 years ago that the President of the United States was going to take half of the health care law and postpone it for a year on his own.
Well, he had some encouragement there now.
Well, I understand that. I understand that. And you know who that encouragement was from? The head of the IRS testified in front of Ways and Means, and we asked him, why did you do this on your own? And he said, we were providing relief to a lot of people who complained, in a nutshell. Now, I didn't think he had the legal authority to do that, and that's why I introduced H.R. 2667 in Ways and Means, which we voted on the floor. And you know, a lot of people may not know this, but I had 35 Democrats voted for my bill to delay the employer mandate for a year. Basically, do what the president did, but to do it through the Congress.
When you have these votes, Congressman, there are 40 now, and all the letters and all those are described by skeptics as show votes, because everyone on the House side knows this, that's utterly unacceptable to the Senate, and it's going to go nowhere. Are you trying to have it both ways?
Well, no. First thing I would say is 7 of those became law. So I guess they would say that 33 of the 40 were show votes. So I'd probably say that. But I would say, first of all, 7 of those became law. Number 2, if people in the House or the Senate were sent up there to only vote on what they know the other body would accept, there wouldn't be a lot of voting going on. I'm not sent to Washington to just vote on bills that the Senate's going to agree with. I'm not. I'm sent to represent my constituents, and I hear from them all the time. Some agree with me, some disagree with me. But I think generally I am right where my district is. I think I am right in the mainstream of conservatism, which is right where my district is. If you look at the history of this district, and I have, and I talk to a lot of people. So I'm not sent up there to wait and see what the Senate does. I'm sent up there to try to lead the conversation. Now, we've convinced our Senate colleagues on 7 bills. I think we're making progress. We got a long way to go, and we'll see where this goes. But there are a lot of things that we pass. There are a lot of things that the Senate passes that the other body doesn't take up. And I'd go a step further, Steve. There are a lot of things that the president proposes that he knows are never going to be brought up by the House or the Senate. Yet he does it anyway. Are those show proposals? Part of the process is not just voting, but communicating ideas through legislation, through proposals, and as Margaret Thatcher used to say, making the argument to the people, and ultimately with the goal of winning the argument. You don't win the argument and make the argument by doing nothing. You do it by proposing ideas, turning them into legislation, voting them, and challenging the other body to do something with it. So I think to separate the communications, the argument side of politics, and Congress's job, and narrow it down to one thing and one thing only, and that's voting, that's completely inconsistent with our democracy.
Well, your majority leader has said in no uncertain terms that it's just not acceptable to consider a shutdown anyway, or to allow that to happen purely on the basis of Obamacare, as it's called. You agree with that?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to shut the government down.